With me now, former campaign manager for Donald J. Trump and OAN political commentator Corey Lewandowski. Corey, good to see you.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
All right, Corey, let's start with this question of the day today. As you know, right now, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals is listening. They're having their hearings right now. They're set to rule on President Trump's executive order on refugees, on travelers from these 7 nations that are under jihadi terror rule or torn apart by jihadi violence. Like I said in my introduction, Corey, I suspect they're going to reject this order. If they do, what happens next?
Well, what would happen if the order was rejected is that the Department of Justice, hopefully with a new leader, Jeff Sessions, if the Senate can move forward with his nomination and confirm him, would have the ability to appeal directly to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court would then have the opportunity to decide to either accept the case or reject the case. If they were to accept the case, they would listen to the merits of the case, and then with a 4-4 court right now, potentially have to make a decision on if the executive order is indeed constitutional. What I think you have, though, at the heart of the matter is asking the U.S. government to put a temporary hold for 7 countries, a moratorium, if you will, to make sure that we can have the right vetting process in place so that we know exactly who's coming into the country. You know, Liz, what's amazing is people think it is the right under our Constitution to come to this country. It's not. It's the highest privilege that somebody can have. We are the greatest nation in the world, but we have to protect ourselves. And what that means is making sure that we know who's coming to the country first and foremost. And what we have seen in the past is that the vetting system that is currently in place has not done an adequate job of making sure that we don't have jihadists or potential terrorists coming into our country. So let's slow down. Let's take a step back and let's make sure, for the sake of the American people, we know who's coming into our country.
Right. I think a point the left misses very often here is that this is a temporary moratorium. This is 90 days, 100 days on some of these countries, and then indefinite on Syrian refugees until we get the vetting system. But that's the political aspect of it. The constitutional aspect, Corey, I mean, talk to me about that. If this reaches the Supreme Court, we know that there's a 4-4 split right now, but constitutionally, was this executive order in line with Trump's authority as the commander-in-chief, as the chief executive of our nation?
The way I understand this is that it's definitely in the purview of the President of the United States to write any executive order he deems to be appropriate at the time. Based on the clauses in the Constitution which give him that privilege, he has the ability to write that. And what we've seen, unfortunately, is we've seen that a very liberal judge who has taken on himself to put the temporary stay in place. And then, unfortunately, the Ninth Circuit, as you mentioned at the opening, is the most liberal circuit. And that's why, you know, the liberals feel very good about putting a moratorium on this executive order, putting a stay on this. The difference is it has been unprecedented in the history of our Constitution that we have a president who's put an executive order in place, which is lawful, dutiful, and the courts have stepped in right now to say, no, it is not in the interest of our country of doing this. And what I don't think the judges fully appreciate, or what they fully understand, is that, God forbid, there is another terrorist attack. What the president has attempted to do is exactly what he said he would do on the campaign trail, which is to put a hold on understanding who's coming into our country until we can have extreme vetting. Look, we had in San Bernardino a woman who came into the country under a K-1 visa. She was married. She married a U.S. citizen. She came in legally, but the State Department's vetting process was so inadequate and so inept that they couldn't even check her social media activities, and then she went on to kill 15 people. We need to do a better job. If one person gets into the country who is willing to commit a terrorist act against our people, it's one too many. So let's just take a step back. Let's make sure that our country has the systems in place, the protocols in place, so that we can make sure we know who is coming into the country. And the fact that the president did this without announcing it to the world, I think was the smartest thing. Because if he didn't do that, if he would have announced that we're going to do this in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, we'd see exactly what you are seeing right now, is that people are pouring into the country unfiltered, with no background checks being conducted.
Right, let me push back on you on that point just a little bit, because President Trump, when he was being interviewed by Bill O'Reilly before the Super Bowl, he said he was happy with how the rollout went, even though that first weekend, you know, there was mass confusion at the airports. There were, you know, the protests outside. There were people that were legal residents of the United States who were stopped, some of them up for, 12 or 24 hours, quite a number of them, over 100, I believe. I mean, happy with that rollout. Is that a comparison? Is that comparative to what the chaos he would have been anticipating had he told people ahead of time? Because even as someone who supports the order, I mean, I think the rollout could have been a little smoother.
No, I don't disagree with you. The rollout could have been smoother. And what I'm saying is by not announcing that this is going to take place to the general world in 3 weeks or 6 weeks or 9 weeks, what we did, and look, was there a problem with the rollout? Sure there was. Could it have been communicated better? Of course, through the government agencies. There's no question about that. But what we didn't do for a change is telegraph to the terrorists and potential terrorists of when we're going to implement this order. See, what happened in the last previous administration for 8 years is we're going to go into a particular city with our military. We're going to attack from the northeast at exactly 2 p.m. And for 6 weeks or 8 weeks prior to that, everyone would leave, and then we'd go and attack the being over there. Then we'd say, we're going to withdraw on this particular day. This president's much more unpredictable, and the rollout could have been executed better, of course, but what we understand is that by not telegraphing that this was going to take place to the entire world, what we did is we stopped potential people from coming in the first place, and the goal here of this president is to protect the American people. That's first and foremost.
Right, and I mean, that's what he said all along, from the campaign trail to the inauguration to afterward, putting America first. Let me go back to the judge really quick. Go back to the Ninth Circuit Court. I mean, part of the unprecedented aspect of this is the back and forth between the chief executive and the judicial branch here. I mean, Corey, I don't think we've ever seen a president actively say, because the judge ruled like this, he would be responsible for a terror attack if that happened. I mean, that's a pretty serious accusation to levy. But if, like you said earlier in the segment, if this is a constitutional executive order on the part of President Trump, I mean, does this amount to judicial activism? Is this the judicial branch going outside of their authority?
What we have seen, unfortunately, over the last probably decade to two is that once members of the bench are appointed and they have an appointment for life, and I understand the value of doing that, and the three branches of the government, is they decide that on many occasions they want to become people who are writing the laws, not interpreting the laws. And so they become activist judges. And what we've seen this many occasions. And so there has to be a system in place where you can hold people accountable. I'm not recommending, I'm not suggesting that people don't get appointed to the federal bench for life, but I am concerned that if a justice wants to become a legislator, or he wants to make positions that are required that everybody follows under a legislative process, then they should step down from his seat, as many have done, and go and run for office. Look, we saw this with Governor Sandoval in Nevada. He was a federal judge. He could have stayed there for life. He stepped down. He wanted to become an elected official, and he ran for office, and he was successful. If this judge is so concerned about setting public policy, then he should step down from the bench and go and run. That's the way the system works. But legislating from the bench is not the role of the judiciary branch of the government. It is to interpret the rules and regulations that the Congress or the president has implemented, and I think this one's way out of line.
Right, and perhaps we will see this before the Supreme Court before too long, because that's the way that it seems to be going. Corey Lewandowski, thanks so much for being here. All right, guys, we'd like to know your thoughts on the matter too. Tweet me, Liz_Wheeler. We'll be back in 1 minute.